Montreal Canadiens, or Les Canadiens en français, finished third in the Atlantic Division in 25-26 with 106 points. They beat out Tampa Bay 7 games in the opening round. Late third period goal by Alex Newhook. They beat Buffalo in round 2 in 7 games. Overtime goal by Alex Newhook. But finally succumbed in 5 when they were pancaked by the Eastern Conference champion Carolina Hurricanes. Neil, the expectation that we had coming in to this season was whether or not they could get to the playoffs for the second consecutive year. I think we kind of had them on the bubble. We thought that them getting to the playoffs was going to depend on a lot of their young players getting to the next level in terms of production. And indeed, that happened, and it even exceeded our expectations.
There were some players that developed in the Montreal organization that I think took a lot of people by surprise. Leading that group was Cole Caufield, the diminutive goal scorer, who ended up with 51 goals this season. But there were a lot of areas of their team, as we'll go through, that got a lot better this season than it was last season. And by the time the season was over, the regular season, that is, this was a legitimate playoff team and would be, in some people's minds, a contender for the Stanley Cup.
There were a few things more exciting than the start of the season that they had, where they had several late-game comebacks, and always one of the more exciting teams to watch in the NHL. In achieving that second straight playoff berth, they were 15 points better than they were a year ago, and tied with the Lightning, who they met in that opening round for the 5th highest point total in the NHL. Their goal differential improved by 47, from minus 20 to plus 27. Most of that coming in the goals scored area, where they scored 38 more goals than they did a year ago. Interestingly, their special teams, kind of two ships passing in the night. The power play went from 21st up to 10th, but their penalty killing went from 9th, falling down to 18th. But positionally, Neil, I think one of the most intriguing areas took place in goal. And you remember a year ago, it was Sam Montembeault, Jakub Dobes, and Kaiden Primo, who was then since traded to Carolina. This year, Dobes, Montembeault, and Jacob Fowler. But as we saw with Montembeault, his stats completely collapsed, as did his confidence. He went from 2.82 and a .902 save percentage a year ago with 4 shutouts to 3.43 and .872. Dobes clearly emerged as the number one and wound up playing all but 8 minutes and 23 seconds of the postseason, and really one of the single biggest reasons the team was able to advance to the Eastern Conference Final.
Yeah, and you know what I notice is going on all over the league is that the second-tier goaltenders, meaning not superstar goalies, not Vasilevsky and that ilk of goaltender, but the majority of teams don't have a superstar goalie. They have a number one, maybe a number 1A and a number 1B, and they switch around quite often. And you'll see teams that, you know, last year their goaltending was one way, and now this year it's totally different guys. And Montreal's one example of that, where they couldn't get it straightened out, yet in the playoffs they seem to have it all straightened out. You take a look at Carolina, who ran most of the year on Brandon Bussi, the unknown rookie who they brought in there and who ended up having a tremendous season for the Carolina Hurricanes, winning a lot of games. When the playoffs start, Freddie Anderson went back in net. So it is peculiar when you have this level of goaltender that's not the Patrick Waugh, Marty Brodeur, Mike Richter level goalie, but is a notch below. But they seem to flip around all over the place, and it's their confidence at some points that's failing, that they can't get back into the net. And then when it's at a supreme, then they're in there and they can't get them out of the net. And it's really a peculiar part of this era of hockey.
When you watch Jakub Dobes this past season, do you think that a year from now, we're going to be saying for the second consecutive year, a Montreal goaltender that looked like they were going to be the heir apparent has gone by the wayside, and then perhaps Jacob Fowler steps in and becomes the number one. But there's something about Dobes' game that I really like. There's a little bit of sandpaper there. He's kind of a hybrid between Billy Smith and Ron Hextall.
No, there is something there. I do like Dobes. How could you not, the way he played in the playoffs? But it wouldn't surprise me by this time next year that there's somebody else. I mean, you take a look at Philadelphia's goaltending and the number of goaltenders that they've tried and moved around. And Vladar finally became their guy. At least he was this past season. Let's see if he is next season. But I think the goaltending is so close, and it's just a matter of confidence in your game, because goaltending is really the one position where you've got to be clear, you've got to be confident, you've got to relax and let the mistakes go by and not think about them. A goal goes in, you got to refocus quickly. I just find it an interesting position right now in 2026.
Let's talk about the skaters now. We'll start up front. Cole Caufield, one of two 50-goal scorers in the league in 25-26. He scored 51, second only to Colorado's Nathan MacKinnon. Nick Suzuki had his first 100-point season. Juraj Slafkovský, fourth season in the league, played all 82 games, career highs, 30 goals, 43 assists, 73 points, and a +9. And for the second consecutive season, the Habs had the rookie point leader in the league in Ivan Demidov, played all 82 games, 19 goals, 62 points. And you remember last year, it was Lane Hutson who led all rookies in scoring, but we'll get to him in just a second. But let's also look about some pretty good depth forwards on this team. We already mentioned Alex Newhook at the top of this show, and then there's Jake Evans, Kirby Dach, Josh Anderson, who just seemed to be made for the playoffs this year, Zach Bolduc, Phillip Danault, and Alexander Texier. So a pretty good core up front with this team.
And some good young players and some future for sure. The one thing they don't have is a great amount of size, although Dach and Anderson are big, but they don't have great size up front. They've got great speed, great skill, but they're going to want to get a little bit bigger up there.
And not a bad defense core, of course, led by Hutson, but there was also Noah Dobson, who, even though played relatively well, I still don't think he's worth over $9 million a year. And you add to that Mike Matheson, who had a good playoff, Kaiden Guhle, and Alexander Carrier. And then after that, it kind of thins out a little bit.
It does. And I agree with you on Dobson. I mean, if Dobson's making that, imagine what Mike Matheson and Guhle think that they should be making. But the defense core there is not bad for sure.
This team clearly wore down by the end of the playoff run that they had. They had to go 14 games and met a Carolina team that had two long stretches of rest. But I think the reality here is this is still a progression over a year ago. And I think we've also seen Marty St. grow into this role as head coach.
Oh, definitely. Well, he'd never been a head coach before, except for Pee-wees in Connecticut, where he was coaching there when he went to the Montreal Canadiens and said that he thought he could coach the Habs. I got to tell you, I was stunned when they made him head coach with no experience. But he certainly did an admirable job this season getting the team where it is. And you're right about another thing you said, which is they made progress. And we've talked about these teams during spring cleanings. What's the number one thing I look for anyways is progress. You just want to see, did they make progress this season? You have to say Montreal definitely made progress.
So let's see what the work ahead is for the management team of Jeff Gorton and Ken Hughes. Team has 8 picks in this upcoming draft, 2 in the 4th round, their own, and New Jersey's pick for acquiring Jonathan Kovacevic back in June of 2024. They have 2 in the 7th round, their own, and Carolina's pick that they acquired in exchange for Caden Primo on June 30th, 2025. They have no pick in the 5th round. That was traded to San Jose along with Carey Price. They're a longtime legendary goaltender. That was part of a salary dump and also to get the Sharks up to the cap floor. In exchange, they received Gunnar Larock, who currently has no NHL contract. So kind of a little bit of whole lot of nothing there. Their projected cap space right now, about $11 million, and that may increase by about $6.5 million because it was announced that Brendan Gallagher, who has played all 911 games in his NHL career with Montreal, is now seeking a trade. He played 77 regular season games this season, but only 3 in the playoffs.
Yeah, and if they are able to move Gallagher, and I would think they would, Brendan Gallagher is still a usable piece for a team, although he's had a lot of miles, not a big guy, but is a usable piece someplace. Nobody is going to take the $6.5 million on. So they're going to have to eat some of that 6.5, but they will get out of some of it. They probably won't likely get much back for him because a team will say, if I'm going to take on that salary, you're getting squat back. But Brendan Gallagher's been a great Montreal Canadien, very passionate, very emotional about playing for the Habs. And you could see it when he talked about having to part ways with the organization because it was just best for his career. So we wish him well because he's been a really good Montreal Canadien.
Their lone UFA, and you talk about some bizarre happenings here, is forward Patrik Laine, who played only 5 games this past regular season. He had surgery in October for a core muscle issue and then spent the rest of the season on IR, although he says he could have played in January. And the organization is saying all the right things. Great teammate, great guy. Laine himself has said how much he and his wife have enjoyed Montreal, but this is yet another stop for this player. That simply hasn't worked out.
Okay, now I got to do a little bit of bragging because when Laine got traded to the Montreal Canadiens from the Columbus Blue Jackets by Don Waddell, which was basically a giveaway. The player that they got back was a defenseman who is now in Boston, Jordan Harris, I believe. That's who they got back for Laine. I said on the show, what the hell is Montreal doing? Like, why do they want Laine? I thought they were building towards a future. This guy has been disappointing everywhere he's gone. And I got a lot of crap, if you remember, in social media for saying that. The Montreal fans were all like, well, this is the coming of the Stanley Cup, bringing this guy in.
Well, because he had a relatively decent start in his first year there and some power play goals, and there was a little bit of magic that was clicking in. But as we've seen everywhere else, it just fizzles with him soon after.
Right, and then, of course, comes along the eventual benching by St. Louis, telling him not to dress, stay home, and he doesn't play. And this goes on everywhere because the only thing that Patrik Laine, according to sources, wants to do is score goals. That's it. Nothing else. The rest of the game can go to hell in a handbasket. I would think that he'd have trouble finding a contract for next season. You combine his play that we've just talked about, combined with injury problems all the time, he may find himself back in Suomi, which is, of course, Finland.
Yes. There are RFAs, and I want to see your take here. Kirby Dach, who has kind of been received in a hot, cold way by the Canadiens fans. Zach Bolduc, who we mentioned before, and Joe Veleno rounds out the forwards. And your buddy Arber Xhekaj on defense.
Yeah, Arber Xhekaj, which is pronounced Xhekaj for whatever reason. A tough guy. Montreal needs a guy like that. They certainly needed him. In the Buffalo series, he was very important to them. Took care of Greenway, tried to measure up with him. In the Tampa series, he went after Sabrin, who was their tough guy. Yeah. There really wasn't a tough guy to go after on Carolina that got into the lineup. So I would be surprised if they didn't bring back Arber Xhekaj. But then I like Kirby Dach. I like Bolduc, Veleno. It'll be interesting to see who Kent Hughes decides to ink up again or where they go to get players to replace the ones they decide not to sign.